I'm going to be talking about FDR's Second Bill of Rights. It was proposed in 1944 during his State of the Union address. He was arguing that the original Bill of Rights had proved inadequate to ensure us in equality in the pursuit of happiness. He stated that having such rights would guarantee American society and American security, and that the place of the United States in the world depended on how far those rights had been put into practice. And I'm going to play the film. Well, maybe I am. It's not coming on, however.
It might be because if you try to do control click. Control click. That works.
There we go.
There you go. Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, yeah. You're fixing the volume. I assume others can't hear that too, right?
Really?
Okay. Francis says there's a share sound button in Zoom.
Okay.
Could you help direct her to how she would find that, Francis?
I think it's under share screen, the arrow up. Or possibly under, yeah. Go to share. Oh, what? That's not what it was. Do I have control right now? Oh.
Yeah, I think you're a co-host.
All
right.
Audio settings, that's where it is.
Sorry about the technical difficulties.
That's all right. Yeah. let's jump ahead.
Yeah, you could do the slides and Francis could look for the button, and once he finds it, maybe we could.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. The rights that he was talking about include the right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries or shops or farms or mines of the nation. The right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. I think it's interesting that he included. Oh, hold on. I don't know how to get rid of. I don't know how to get rid of what's playing. Maybe I'm the only one that can hear it. The right, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. I think it's interesting that he included recreation in that. The Depression made poverty pervasive, and war meant sacrifice was pervasive. Okay, next. The right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living is another right. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. The right of every family to a decent home. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. Can you all hear me over this?
Yes. Yep, we can.
Okay.
For me, you're kind of like waving in and out like a little bit. The volume seems to be really changing a lot while you're speaking.
I'm gonna. Oh. Okay.
Mark, let's see what it's still playing the video in the background, you're saying, for you?
Yeah, but I just got rid
Okay.
of
Oh, look,
the
see that?
sound.
No, pull that screen up again that you just had up.
Okay.
You see that pause button
No. This?
up?
Okay.
Yeah. Did that
We're
work?
good. We're good. Yes,
Okay.
that does it. Thank you.
Go. Yeah.
I'm sorry about all this. I haven't done this before.
No, it's on my end. I could hear you still very, fairly well. I've heard everything you've said. So just continue. It's so far so good. Thank
Okay. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. And that includes medical, dental, and eye care. The right to adequate protection from economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. So that means adequate Social Security, which we don't have currently, Medicare or Medicaid, and unemployment insurance. And the right to good education. In those days, that meant elementary and secondary education. But these days, that includes college. And here are all the various rights. And basically, the film was just FDR reciting these as well. So we didn't really miss anything for not having it. Are there, and I'd like, I guess, to point out, we don't really have a lot of this at this point. Somewhat 44 to 23, some 80 years later, we don't have a lot of this. We do have the Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, although Social Security is not adequate currently. And we have some medical care for some people, but a lot of the rest of it is not available to most people. Okay, are there any questions?
So what do you know, like, why this never passed? Like why this never, like,
Well,
what ended up happening with this?
Died fairly soon after that. So I assume that's why it was not, it was proposed in his State of the Union, but wasn't passed.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
All I'll say is, like, it's really interesting being in law school right now. I just took an administrative law class, and, like, basically, like, so much, like, of legal precedent and, like, how the courts decide things was determined when FDR was president. That it was like a super transitional period because the courts became their last way to, like, stop all this stuff that would be good for regular people, using the courts to strike down everything. So they were, making saying, oh, that, the government can't regulate, anything. And so that's when FDR started to try to pack the court. And then suddenly the court gave up on everything. But I'm curious if the courts would have fought him on stuff like this, because, if it truly is a Bill of Rights, that's, damn near a constitutional amendment. And what's really interesting is all those doctrines that the court used in, like, the 1930s to strike down all of his programs. The new Supreme Court today is reviving all of those doctrines. So it's like we're reliving, 100 years later, same stuff happening.
Yeah.
And I see Francis has the video now. And Fran, I think you are co-host. See if it lets you share your screen.
Oh,
Talking to Francis. Oh, there we go. He said he figured out how to play the video, Mark. So we'll do
okay.
that.
I don't know if anybody still wants to see that.
It's only 2 minutes long, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see it.
Accepted
Okay, go ahead.
a second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation, the right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living, the right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom, freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad, the right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, the right to a good education. All of these rights spell security. And after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world.
Good thought. Thank you.
Yeah,
Paul?
Martin, it looks like, oh, sorry.
Yeah. Paul, did you have something to say?
No, I just wanted to second your assumption that FDR died soon thereafter, and this was done in January of 44. 15 months later, he was dead. The war in Europe was still going on, and in the Pacific. It was June of May of 45 before Germany surrendered, and August of 45 before the Japanese surrendered. So I think this was on his short list for things to do once the war ended. The British, however, and among these things were the right to adequate food, and those of us are promoting the right to have food when we engage in activities such as we discussed last month, or maybe it was the month before, on with Sanjay and the Indian Cultural Association and the food banks distribution, and the right to a decent home, where everybody's working here. A whole bunch of us are working on in the chapter, working on the right to a decent home and the right to medical care. And we've been pushing this for as long as our revolution has been in existence. And this is part of what inspired and pushed Bernie. I mean, he had 4 pillars to his campaign and to his ideological advocacy. You know, what FDR promoted in the best parts of the New Deal, including the Second Bill of Rights. That was one. The mission and delivery of civil rights and the spirit and mission of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. The third was the advances of European Nordic social democracy. And the fourth was the dynamism of the message of Eugene V. Debs in the early 1900s. So, you know, FDR's Second Bill of Rights is pretty significant. I would also add that was interesting. The British had to wait until the war was over before they got their national health insurance. And they initiated it as soon as they possibly could when the Labour Party won the next elections, and the Conservatives were thrown out right after the war, not during the war. That's all I had to say. Thanks. Thanks, Mark. Nicely done.
Thank you. Yvonne?
Marge, hi, thanks. That was very well done. I was wondering whether when he said the right to a good education, whether that just meant through high school or did it mean college also?
I imagine back then that it probably meant just secondary education or elementary education, because there weren't that many people going to college at the time. But that's my interpretation. He didn't specify.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kat, did you want to say something too?
I had a question. I just wondering if Mark knew this about FDR. I mean, this stuff is amazing that he put into place. I mean, that he wanted to put into place. But I always find very disturbing was that during World War II, when Jewish refugees came for refuge to the United States, he turned away thousands of them, knowing he had basically sent them back to their deaths. How do you deal with that contradiction? Because that upsets me a lot, because we could have taken them in, easily taken them in.
I agree with you. I think he was a human being, and he probably had some political opponents. I don't know. It's unfortunate. He wasn't perfect.
So
Yeah.
that is a question that a lot of people ask. It is usually phrased as a question also related to why he didn't bomb the trains to Auschwitz. And Mark's answer is correct. A lot of it had to do with political pressure. It's important to remember that it was the 1924 Immigration Act that required quotas based on what part of the world that you come from, that privileged white people from Western Europe, not even, tried to keep out Irish, tried to keep out Italians, very few limitations. And basically, they were stuck with a Congress that was not only incredibly isolationist, but also incredibly both anti-Semitic in the Jewish sense, but also anti-Semitic in terms of the entire Middle East. And so they did their best. And so if anyone has ever heard of Raoul Wallenberg, he was an incredible man and disappeared at some point. They believe that the Soviets captured him, took him to the Gulag, and had him murdered. But he actually worked to provide papers to people to try to get them out if it was possible. I think the worst case that people tend to refer to is the St. Louis, which was a ship that came and tried to offload in Cuba, tried to offload in the United States, and was sent back. And then if you trace the history of anybody who was on that ship, it was not a good ending. So yeah.
I think they were returned to France or something.
Yeah, I think they ended up having to return to France. There was I
believe when they traced it, most of them did die. They perished. Yeah.
And a lot of it also just had to do with the fact that no one at that time wanted refugees that they could not, address. There was also a lot of concern, particularly in the 1930s and leading up to the war with Poland, that a lot of Jews were radicals. So they were communists and they were socialists and they were disruptors. And people didn't want them for that purpose either. And that is also the same. It's also important to remember, and people do, we emphasize the Jewish deaths in the Holocaust, but 6 million others were killed, including political prisoners, the Roma, people with disabilities, and there were also, incredible hardship for people, who were under German occupation. So,
yes. This was also a time when there were a lot of Nazis in the US working to undermine FDR, and white supremacy was quite a common thing at that point too, and anti-Semites as well. Okay, Yvonne.
Hi, thank you. This is an interesting discussion because, well, all over the world, but especially in this country, we have a problem with making our leaders into heroes. And you have to be able to see them in all their good and their bad. The people who wrote our Constitution okayed slavery. As a matter of fact, Paul, you will remind me, but every president, except for the two Adamses, every president up until Lincoln had slaves. Lincoln, I think, was the first one, aside from the Adamses, that did not hold slaves. Am I right, Paul?
You're right.
Right.
Yes.
Martin didn't hold slaves, but that's because he was poor.
I'm sorry?
Martin Van Buren didn't have slaves, but that was because he was poor.
Oh, okay. So we have to be able to explain that. We're still protecting the Constitution, but it was written by human beings that were extremely imperfect. And Lincoln himself did not begin by wanting to liberate the slaves. He felt like he had to do it in order to win the war, really, to win the Civil War. So we have to be able to explain that. And I believe that Hori put something in there asking, why would we want the trains to be bombed to Auschwitz? Hori, it wasn't the trains, it was the train tracks that they wanted bombed so that the trains wouldn't be able to proceed to Auschwitz. So, and the reason, by the way, which Roosevelt gave for not wanting to do it is that it was private property. So figure that one out. Can't bomb private property. So we have to live with that. Have to be able to explain why people do good and why they do bad. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a very complex time.
Looks like Huri's got his hands up, her hand up as well.
I just want to say my dad was in World War II, just to keep it in perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would all agree that, the times would have, different complexities and contradictions. Unfortunately, I think what happens is, after those times are over, at least in this country, I mean, and perhaps everywhere, we only pick the easy explanations about the people who were there at that time. And I would argue that, for the most part, we in this country, we have not internalized just how vicious this country was to, to people of, to Black people. It's not in the veins of people who live here, who were born here, until you actually start looking at the books, or it's we don't take the effort to learn from that. And so yeah, I think FDR had contradictions, and people before him had contradictions, but there's a tendency to gloss over those contradictions after it's when looking back. And that leads us to I think repeated mistakes, unfortunately. But um, uh, he did good things, but we probably didn't learn from the bad things.
Well, I'm not seeing any other hands up.
I think we have a good segue into Ted's presentation because of all the abuse of American citizens and not American citizens in this country. And it's still going on.
Yes, and it is happening disproportionately along racial lines. And so with that being said, thank you so much, Marg. Great job. Good to see you again. And thank you. Learned quite a bit from that presentation. And so thank you for doing that. And so
Sorry about
with
all the
no
glitches.
yes. Round of applause. We got technical difficulty solved and all. We got it done. So yes.